think we can give the people kind of a run through on your experience with the Transition Spire and then how that led into your latest bike.
Yeah, I got a Spire last year, and the reason I went that direction is I was coming off of an Enduro S4 and kind of reached the conclusion of having a slightly shorter reach and a longer chainstay would be ideal, and the Spire did fit that bill. And I also had the opportunity to demo one, and that's what really led to me going down that path. Is I feel like it's just a pretty well-rounded bike. It has solid geometry and the suspension's decent. So getting that opportunity to demo it definitely helped solidify kind of what I was going for. Compared to the S4 Enduro, I feel like that bike cornered better, which was definitely something I was going for. It had that less vague kind of running wide feel. It actually climbed surprisingly well. That was like the first thing that really struck me as a difference to the Enduro. They're very close, is how well it climbed. I think it just has to do with the seat angle being steeper, and it puts you in a better seated climbing position. And yeah, I just was like, it seems like a decent bike. I'll go for it, and got a hold of one. I went with a size large. Yeah, kind of going by like the front rear center ratio. It was on paper a little bit better than what the S4 Enduro was. Although like with that whole front rear center ratio thing, I think the head angle definitely has something to do with it. I'm not 100% sure. I think that the slacker, the head angle, the number can be a little bit farther apart just because it's just the way, I don't know exactly how to describe the difference, but I think it does allow for it to work better just because it puts the front wheel farther out and then your hands are still closer. And that bike, like I'd say compared to like at the time, compared to the Enduro, the suspension wasn't quite as good, but it also had a lot of like pop to it. So that bike was very lively for a 170 bike. Like that was a standout thing. Is it was weird because it didn't ride quite like a 170 plow, but it could, pop around. But then if you needed the travel, it was there to bail you out. A big reason why I went with that is like you look at their geometry charts in the XL and XXL have a longer swing arm or longer chainstay, which they do through the seat stay. And I had aspirations of acquiring that XL swing arm or seat stay, and unfortunately was shot down on that. So I was a little bummed about that. I think it really would have actually made the size large ride a lot better than what it did. Because once again, like a lot of Brian and I's complaints with bikes are because we ride size larges. And in the size large, you kind of get a little bit screwed because you generally get the medium chainstay, but the front's long. So it's just, and a lot of people ride size larges. So you probably understand what I'm talking about, or, you can have an idea or get the feel for that. And it's just, so that was my hope, was get the large because the reach was comfortable. I feel like that's in the range of what works for me. And then ideally get that longer swing arm, and it would have been I think it would have been really better than what it was based on kind of the way I ride. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And I had a couple manufacturing defects that I had to deal with along the way, which, thanks to Transition's warranty department, they helped sort out, and it was pretty painless, but it was still time that I had to rip the bike apart and put it back together a couple times. So yeah, that was a little frustrating. That, and then the one thing that like really actually kind of ground my gears was I had to swap the steer tube out of the box. It was really short and like maybe like 20 mil of extra stack, and then you were like overextended, which is like, that's not much. So that was one thing that just really bothered me. And fortunately I had my old bike and my old fork that I was able to swap the CSU. But like, if you don't have that, you have to go spend like $250 on a CSU, which is kind of unfortunate when you just bought an expensive, like that bike was not cheap. It was the most expensive bike I bought in my life at that point. And that just kind of sucks. Say you spend $5,000 and you got to go spend another $250 to make your bike rideable in a comfortable manner. It's a real first world problem. Like, I want to be clear, it's a real first world problem, but it did bother me like a lot. It was just, it is what it is, but like it still was just a little bit like leave the steer tube, a little bit longer. Like it's a couple spacers. You're gonna be okay. Like let the customer cut the steer tube. That's just my only like, and it's not just that brand; it's a lot of other brands too. But that's just one thing. It's like leave the steer tube long, let them cut it.
Yeah, especially for a bike that's an enduro race bike, and it's funny you see a lot of transition riders with a really high stack. I feel like, um, and we've talked about it a little bit before, but having that longer chainstay, which the transition has, it kind of benefits from that higher bar setup. So yeah, it's definitely can see how it's annoying that you had to go switch steers. I mean, especially just to take the time to do that. And yeah, not every customer, even if they've got a steer, are going to be able to just go do that by themselves.
Yeah, so I mean, overall, like the bike rode well. So one thing to note with that, I don't recall. Like, I think I maybe like I can't remember like crashing that bike other than like 2 times. So that's a positive. Like compared to the S4 where I had that front end go out on me, like it was its job. The bike was decent. Like it's a very solid, viable bike. If you ride the medium, you're in luck. That thing's sick. If you past that, it's not quite as good, but the medium is really good. And what was interesting is it seemed like quite a few people that had enduros previously ended up riding Spires like that year.
Yeah, totally.
So that was just something that seemed to be a common trend, was that shift. And like, yeah, I don't like, the thing was solid. Like it really, honestly, in terms of like ride quality, like didn't have any glaring weaknesses. Like everything about it was, pretty. Like this brings me back to like the TR500 is like it was just like not really any weaknesses, not any like wow it does this incredibly well, but it also just like it was a solid bike. So and had some other very much in line with kind of what the Spire is and what.
Yeah,
So
it's funny you bring that up. I feel like that's kind of Transition's MO is
just like
they're not trying to
solid
reinvent the
bike.
wheel, but it's a good bike that's easy to get along with. But you were saying earlier, like what were some of the other things that kind of spoiled the experience for you besides the head tube thing or the steer tube?
I mean that, and then I guess like there was, as I kind of sort of mentioned, there was a couple manufacturing defects. Let's just say that. And my guess, and this isn't like pointing fingers at Transition, it's just more like unfortunately their manufacturer made mistakes, and then fortunately none of them were what I would consider like a safety hazard. They were just like the bike kind of like fell apart in a way, or had like a weird issue that isn't good, especially for something that was not inexpensive. And once again, like they took care of it. That whole process was smooth, but it did involve me having to take apart the bike and put it back together a couple times. And then, but yeah, so it's like if it comes down to like and also I think a big impact on this situation. This is my guess. I have no idea. This is just a guess, but it's post COVID bicycle production, which I imagine just like during COVID there was that the demand went crazy, and then manufacturers probably like, damn, we got to step up production, and they start trying to pump out as much product as possible. And when that happens, I mean, typically your quality is going to drop if you try to really ramp up production and quantity. Like I don't think you're ever going to have like a, heavy increase in quantity that doesn't impact quality. So
yeah, with a similar amount of resources that
so yeah, I think
we're really strained at that time. Yeah, it's always frustrating, especially when you're in the position of spending your hard-earned money. What had you looking for something else after that? Was it you were just kind of fed up with those issues, or were you looking for something different, like ride quality wise?
I'd say like things I learned from that transition, like that I'm like, all right, this is solid. Is I think a wheelbase this is for me, right? a wheelbase of around 1280 is pretty good. Like, I think that's, for me, I would like to ideally ride the biggest wheelbase possible that is still maneuverable. Like, try to find the balance there between as much stability as I can get without making it impossible to turn. So 1280, like that, the Spire was like in there in that range, and I was like, yeah, like the bike overall, basically it's like every bike I've been going to, the reach gets slightly shorter and then the rear end gets slightly longer with the wheelbase staying the same. So then it was like trying to find what's next from that progression, and honestly there's not much.
Yeah, the pickings get really slim once you start moving past the ratio that's on the Spire, like 450, 480 reach for a size large. When there's maybe a few bikes that I know of that operate outside of that realm.
I mean, I've looked at Nicolai's a couple times over the years, and I think last year or 2 years ago that Paul Aston put out this article on like his ultimate bicycle, and it's a G1 that has a long, like a 9.5 essentially, or 240 shock, and then a dual crown on it. And to me, that's just like intriguing that you could build a pedalable bike with a dual crown and, around like 200, basically make a downhill bike you can climb. Although, like, I haven't, if I can do that at some point, I'd like to, but let's just start with run it as a stock enduro bike first. So yeah, I went with the G. Also riding, Brian, as people know, I'd imagine, has a large Geometron, which is a G1, but they're the same bike. Just I don't really understand it. Like, I guess Geometron is like, they're like a distributor of Nicolai, but they put their own name on it.
Yeah, I think so. They're like a separate entity, but the bikes get made by Nicolai, and it seems like it's the same frame. So
yeah, it's like 100% the same frame, I think.
So yeah, maybe we need to interview the guys at Geometron to get a clear view on this. But the guys at Geometron have helped me a ton. They're super cool. And I think they go a long way to make their customers happy. And talk to them and help them set up the bikes. But yeah, anyway, that's a side note. What was the next step?
Yeah, so next, I guess, like, I mean, the wheels were turning to try to acquire one of these bikes. Like, I've looked at them before, but you look at the sizing, and it's like, wow, that is out there. Like, at least to like what's normal convention, it's pretty out there. Like, for example, size medium has a 495 reach, which is giant.
And I mean, that's what I bought the bike for, was to test out their theory on the reach. But I guess what's more in your situation is that, I mean, regardless of what the size is called, you can kind of configure whatever bike you want.
Looking at the numbers of what their size small was, I was like, the wheelbase is basically 1280, and then that's with it the shortest chainstay option, and their chainstay is going 7 mil increments, I think. And then it changes a little bit too with the seat stay mutators. And then like, so hypothetically within each frame size, you have like potentially 12 bicycles out of one, if you're going by like models and how you change geometry and stuff. So it's like, that's just to me is intriguing, because it's like, honestly, like, I don't really know what works for me the absolute best. I don't. I'll admit that. I have ideas. I think I know what I think will work. But at least with this, it's like I can go to either extreme.
Yeah, you've got options. You
could get lost in the sauce with this bike.
Yeah, you've got some room to operate. You got one.
So I acquired it. It was
so you got a small.
Yeah, right? I did. I officially ordered a size small bicycle as a 5'10" person.
Yeah,
but it's not too small. And like, this was something when I was building it, and like first pulled it out of the box, I'm like, I don't know, like this might be really small. like it's hard to, like when you just pick up a bike frame, like it's, I don't know, for me it's hard to tell like how big it's gonna end up being.
Yeah, totally.
So I'll be honest, like when I was putting it together, I'm like, ooh, I might have, this is
Might have messed
potentially
up.
like either good or like an expensive mistake. So,
Yeah.
but
Well,
put it together, and
yeah.
like first time pedaling up the hill, my hands were like in a good spot. I'm like, all right, this is solid. Like,
Yeah. What do you think the reach you ended up with like the geometry configuration?
I think it's around 475. Yeah, the one thing I like stand out with that frame, like that's very apparent, at least, and it's just like attention to manufacturing quality. Like the
Yeah,
welds on the thing are
it's
massive.
insane. They're
Like,
huge. There's so much detail. Like it's a badass looking bike. You take that thing out of the box and like you're sweating it because you just spent a ridiculous amount of money on this weird ass
the mountain
frame
bike.
from Europe. But then when you pull it out of the box, it at least makes you feel a little bit better about it because it just looks badass. It's a quality piece of machinery.
And it has no paint, which is cool. Like, and then they send you a little scour pad with it, so if it gets scratched, you just kind of like scour pad the scratches off, which is like, I'm about that. Like, it keeps it looking fresh for longer. And yeah, I mean, it's the first ride I did on it wasn't very like telling of its ride quality because it was local trails that aren't very, they're not, you're not really pushing the bike. And then had the opportunity to go ride some Team NorCal trails, and yeah, it's like, it was crazy. Like there's this one impact on one of those trails that like just the bike just took it. It was crazy. That shock too. Those EXTs are, that shock is good. Like it's not, I wouldn't say it's the most comfortable shock in the world.
Yeah.
Like it's not for mulling about. It's, if you rode it that shock slow, you'd probably think it sucks, honestly. Like it's not, at least how that one's valved, it's not meant for cruising. But then you start pushing and it really does come alive. And it just, the balance of it is just, I just feel a lot more centered. And going back to what I was talking about in the previous podcast is how you can ride through your feet a little bit more. That's what I find with the longer chainstays. Allows me to really kind of control the bike through my feet, and like my hands are pretty weightless consistently, which is cool. I just use my hands, like lean the bike over. I don't have to like really press into the handlebars or like do a lot of weight transfer. I feel like that's something I've learned riding dirt bikes is like you really keep your hands light. At least that's what I feel like, and really plant your feet. And then you can get that feeling on a bicycle where you're like ripping around a turn and your hands are light, and it's just a nice, you're carrying speed, you just feel light. And yeah, the bike is pretty good cornering. Like I think I need to figure out the timing better. That's a me thing. And then the stability is incredible. Like it's just very stable. It has a lot of traction. It feels like at slower speeds, it's, maybe definitely not the most exciting bike or really designed for going slow. And the faster you go, the better it definitely works, I feel like. And yeah, I'm just kind of getting started on it.
Yeah. We'll have to do a collab Geometron day, maybe switch bikes, have like an extreme size comparison on the freaking XL rig and it's really just a large. It's just got XL numbers.
Yeah.
and the small. I think they will both work. They'll just both work in different ways.
Yeah, it's like the much bigger size is just a different perspective on bikes and how they work and what it does well. And then I basically just bought like a normal size large. It's just like
yeah,
just kind of felt
just happens
correct.
to be small.